It's Tuesday. I'm Eddie Stone. Nice of you to join me. I've been looking forward to today's discussion for, it feels like maybe close to 20 some years. Hi, Alan. Thanks for joining. By the way, as you're joining, Annette, hi, good to see you. As you folks are joining, please take a minute and let us know where you're dialing in from. I realize with travel today, we've got folks that maybe they're supposed to be one place, but they're generally connecting from another. So wonderful to have a chance to connect with everybody. Hi, AJ. Good to see you. Debbie, Stella, good to see you connecting with us. So to get back to our live here, I feel like I've been, sort of preparing for this for a long time. For those that don't know my background, I've been fortunate enough to be involved with the nutritional supplement industry, health and nutrition for close to 30 years. And for me, the story really begins, back in the late 1980s, early 1990s. My mom, Judy, wonderful mom, was having a real health scare. And for a long time, the family struggled to figure out what was going on. She visited a lot of doctors, traveled to all the major university hospitals. And it wasn't until a couple of years into the journey that we realized that she was suffering from issues of toxicity. And ultimately, they were having a negative impact on her immune system, creating an autoimmune response that literally was causing her to deteriorate right before our eyes, and not something that should have been happening at her age and the way she took care of herself. And it was inspiring when the solution was found, the role that nutrition, learning more about health practices, but also thinking about the role of detoxification could really play in helping somebody regain their strength, regain their health, sort of set aside some of the headaches, other things that she was dealing with. And for myself, having already partially been on the journey of being involved in business with nutrition, I really made it a focus to learn all that I could, not just for being able to help my mom or other family members, but really feeling like there's an obligation there to do what I can to help educate the community at large and really wherever that takes me. And I've been very fortunate that it's taken me all over the world. And so I wanted to share with you today a little bit of my journey and some of the things that I'm focused on, because additionally, some of the folks have been hitting me up after the lives and they ask, okay, so there's a lot of things we could focus on from a nutritional standpoint. What are your focuses? And it's never really just one thing, but I'll tell you one of the most important things that I think about, and that's the role of toxins and the impact they have on your health, not just in this sort of current moment, but impact from a long-term standpoint. And that's important to think about, because based upon toxicity, and we'll get into some of these details in just a few moments, it can be literally, and for some people this is true right now, it can be crippling in sort of the moment, right? Everything from symptoms associated with arthritic pain, things of that kind. It can zap people of their energy, it can put them in a situation where they're facing sort of chronic headaches and other issues, but it also can lead to a vulnerability and increased risk associated with degenerative diseases and things of that kind. So it's not just something that's in the moment, it's something that can also reduce your longevity. I mean, quite literally, that's a thing. And for our discussion today, what I primarily want to focus on is the role of toxins in foods that we eat, and to recognize some of the choices that we have and things we can do to at least limit the exposure. I'm realistic. You need to be realistic. There's no way you're going to eliminate your exposure to toxins. I mean, one of the dirty little secrets of a modern society is all of the chemicals that are used to produce the things that we use, whether it's our smartphones or the computer I'm talking to you on today, the automobiles that we drive, the cleaners that we use in our household. So toxins are a part of it. It's chemicals that probably weren't natively, our bodies weren't designed to deal with, but it's just there. And if you're trying to maximize your health, and I'm a big believer in living life in all aspects to the full measure of your potential, whatever that is. And so if you're trying to optimize your health, maximize your energy, make sure that your health is an asset to you as you go about your day, then you need to think about toxicity. So let's start with a couple of the simpler places. First, we all know about herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, right? And the big one that's constantly talked about is Roundup or glyphosate. And glyphosate now has been so long a part of the industrial processes associated with growing food, all the way down to how people manage weed control in their own houses and neighborhoods, that glyphosate now is just a part of the system. It's a systemic component of not just the food supply, it's in the soil, it's in the water, it's even in the rain. It's one of those things that's sort of out there. And for those that don't know a lot of these details, or maybe are a little challenged by or surprised by what I'm saying, I'd encourage you to go over to our blog. We've got numerous articles on the role of glyphosate and just how widespread it is. It's been found in cereal that you find in the grocery store. It's been found in baby food. So it's a very, very common issue. And in this regard, the one thing I would tell everybody, while it's out there, right, and it's probably impossible to think of zeroing out our exposure, you can be wise with some of your decisions. One of the reasons that we choose organic from an ingredient standpoint with the company, but also Marie and I do in our household and encourage our kids and everybody that gets near us. So, on the one hand, if you think about a genetically modified food that may help to feed people in a nation that struggles both with infrastructure or drought conditions or things like that, on the surface, those are ideas that make a lot of sense. The challenge I think that most people have with GMOs is just the research on what happens when we eat GMOs on a regular basis, right? Which is unfortunately what we're faced with now, unless you're buying organic. Just so you know, you can buy foods that say they are non-GMO by certification, but if you are buying foods that are certified USDA organic, which is what we do with our ingredients, that also means they are non-GMO by rule associated with USDA organic. And if you look at things today, 90+% of soybeans, cottonseed oil, corn, these are all things that have been genetically modified for whatever reasons. And to give you an idea of some of the ways that this is happens at the food level, really what's taking place there, when they're making a GMO food, for example, they make them what's called herbicide tolerant. And so that means they've genetically modified it so that corn stalk or the cotton or the soybean, when the farmer goes out and sprays the Roundup, that crop is not negatively affected by that Roundup. Only the pest or only the fungicides or only the other issues that they're trying to deal with. So they make them what are called herbicide tolerant, right? And so that has enabled farmers to increase their yield, but at what cost? We don't know from a long-term standpoint. And one of the things that I struggle with, and it's not just that it makes them tolerant to, say, glyphosate, it also makes them tolerant to things like dicamba and other things that are in that herbicidal category. And then the other thing that they do from a GMO standpoint, this one's probably the one that worries me the most from a long-term standpoint, is they make them insect resistant by modifying the genes to produce insecticidal protein. So quite literally, the plants are producing a protein that will kill the insects that eat it. Now, I know that there are some safety data out there regarding this issue, but the totality of it from a long-term standpoint is really where my concerns are. And if you have a choice, which we are fortunate to have, where most are watching this today, I say you exercise that choice rather than taking that risk. And that's a reason why, again, we're choosing to deal with organic. But there's other things beyond these sort of common things associated with things like Roundup or GMOs. For example, artificial sweeteners. It's just amazing to me how many people sort of just ignore the role that artificial sweeteners can play in impacting their health. And so just to give you sort of a notion, artificial sweeteners can affect your appetite hormones such as GLP-1, which can essentially make you where you're more hungry than you would be otherwise. I know that's probably counterintuitive. I think it has a lot to do with how our bodies feel satiation when we eat sort of real things, right? If you have sort of a a false sense of sweetness that has no calories behind it, it doesn't really satisfy anything. And I think our carnal instincts there sort of kick in. And so we wind up being more hungry than perhaps we would have been otherwise. They trick the brain. And by tricking the brain, unfortunately, the downside of that is it can trick the brain into being hungry even when a person's not. So on the one hand, it doesn't necessarily allow your body to reach satisfaction, satiation when they're eating food, but also can make you more hungry. And invariably when people are overeating and they're hungry, what are they eating? Well, most likely it's snack food. Most likely it's things that are salty and things that you can't just eat one, right? Probably all of us have been in that sort of situation. And so overindulgence can happen quite frequently when you're dealing with artificial sweeteners because the body just doesn't reach a satisfaction. And of course, it can also have a very negative impact on your gut. It seems like more and more leaky guts, is almost like a societal issue right now. And no question, the chemicals in our food supply, including artificial sweeteners, are playing a role in that. And then we can talk about food dyes. If you're buying something that looks like it's a little greener than it should be, if you're buying something that's blue and you don't think it should be, I did a discussion with someone last night where we did a YouTube talking about Impossible burgers and Beyond Meats and comparing these patties. And the one aspect of these, they've actually got food chemicals, soy derivatives that are causing those fake meats to look like they're actually bleeding. And I understand the mental sensation that people have of wanting to mimic a hamburger in that regard, but just keep in mind, while there may be some aspects for a vegan that wants the taste of meat but doesn't want to eat meat that may make them want those burgers, but they are completely lab-made foods devoid of any of those natural nutrients, micronutrients and fibers and other things that you find in food that create satisfaction. And frankly, those micronutrients are what are fueling our cells and giving us life that we have. And so I'm not a big fan of the fake meats. I understand they can have a role, and like anything, if it's in moderation, you can see some justifications, but it's something to keep in mind as you're making those decisions. And then maybe the last thing I'll mention in this is that food labels themselves, they're tricky. They are tricky. When you see fat-free, right, we often tend to think of fat-free. Okay, great, I'm not getting fat. Generally, that means that the substitution there are sugars, right? So you'll see a very high carbohydrate level, or if you don't see that and it has that sweet taste, then it's filled with artificial sweeteners because they've got to do something to create a product that people would eat. So just sort of keep that in mind, that fat-free is probably not the answer from a totality standpoint. Think about balance. Think about a mix of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins that you would find mimicked in nature. The body responds to balance in that way. Sugar-free, the same thing as fat-free. Then you're going to go over-balanced one way or the other, and that's generally going to be something that's heavy with artificial sweeteners. And then, of course, if you see something that says heart healthy, stay away and/or carefully read that label. Heart healthy is the produce that's natural that you find in the grocery store. Heart healthy are things that are not ultra-processed foods. I'm speaking to someone just last week. We were having a discussion about the amount of ultra-processed food we eat in this country. A few years ago, I was reading a book called Fast Food Nation. I think eventually it became a movie. And there's a lot of books like this that sort of examine this subject matter. And most estimates are that 95% of the calories we eat in this nation are coming from ultra-processed foods. These are things that don't have any kind of cousin or a relationship to nature, right? It's completely man-made. And maybe if that were 5 or 10% of the calories instead of 95% of the calories, we could manage it better. But there's no question that that's playing a role in all of the metabolism issues that we have in this country. We know more than we've ever known about health and nutrition. We're exercising at a pretty reasonable rate, yet our obesity rates in this country are growing. It has to have a lot to do with the amount of ultra-processed food that we're consuming, which really sort of leads to the discussion about obesogens. And for those that haven't had a chance to see one of our posts we had in the last couple of weeks about obesogens, Obesogens are chemicals that really have a very negative impact on your metabolism, and just like this other discussion, your hunger desires. It's disruptive from a hormonal standpoint. Obesogens are chemicals like BPA is a obesogen, and unfortunately, it's in the food packaging that you see. You can get it from canned foods, of course, the bottled waters that people have, but it's so pervasive. Microscopic plastics are so pervasive that now it's actually ingrained in the food supply from a soil standpoint. Plants actually pull it up from the soil. This is one reason why when we buy organic products, we're looking for something with a quality soil health. In fact, I've got a little list here of obesogens for people to be careful of. Another is, for example, flame retardant material. And if you've ever flown very much, then you have that exposure. But anytime you can be considerate of what you're buying, the amount of flame retardants that might be used, are they really necessary? Because these are what I refer to as forever chemicals. They're not going away, and your body is ill prepared to manage them. And so from a hormonal disruption to all the other issues that we talked about, it's really quite negative. And at the end of the day, maybe the biggest factor is, and just to sort of revisit how we started this discussion, we're talking about, what do you focus on? I try to focus on clean as much as possible. I try to think about the label. I think about the sourcing. These are also part of the decision-making processes that we use at the company, because at the end of the day, these things in totality, they create a body burden, and none of them are any worse than what we see with heavy metals and environmental pollutions in that regard. So whether we're talking about cadmium, lead, mercury, these are things that are destructive. They impact negatively, not just the issues we've been talking about, also energy level, muscle recovery. And so there's a variety of issues to be concerned in that regard. So what do you do? Well, I've actually got a little list for it to share, and things that I think about. One, be conscious of the foods that you're eating. Really think about it. And I don't even think you have to do a big journal, right? But you're able to know how much of the food you're eating on a daily basis is packaged food. How much it came from the outer rings of the grocery store where you had to go do some prep work versus how many came from the center where things are packaged and ready to serve. And I understand the convenience, right? We've discussed it before. People having food passed to them through a drive-through window in a styrofoam container under no illusions about it being anything other than just a fuel stop. But if that's true 2 to 3 times per day on your primary meals, that's not good enough. And you can do better. You can do better just in your planning if necessary. If your goal is optimal health, if your goal is to provide an example to your family, to your kids, your grandkids, to the people around you, then be conscious of how you eat and the decisions you make. Know that that influences them one way or the other. And you're either a dire warning or a shining example, and that's a decision that you can make. Recognizing that people work and eating better and higher quality food is expensive. You may not be able to say, I'm going to go 100% one way or the other, but what you can do is make sure you're not one of the statistics where people are eating 95% of their calories from ultra-processed food. So what are things you can do besides just the decision-making around food? One, try to drink as much water as you can. Anytime you can make a decision where you're getting good, clean water instead of sodas or things of that kind, that's a good decision because it supports your body's own ability to manage toxins. Get as much sleep as possible. Now, I realize in the go-go world that we have, getting good quality sleep isn't easy. If you've got an Apple Watch or one of these wearable devices that track sleep, use the app, pay attention to it. It can be really educational. You may have to think about sleep prep, putting away and getting away from screen time sooner than you normally would. Maybe you keep a cooler room, whatever it happens to be, but think about it, and be a student of your own sleep, right? What did you do when you got a good night's sleep? What did you do when you didn't get a good night's sleep? That may mean that you exercised. Exercise generally helps people sleep better. So that's one of those decisions. As I said earlier, when you're thinking about the ultra-processed food, limit that intake of sugar. That isn't good and does not support the body's ability to detox. Limit alcohol. Look for antioxidant-rich foods. Of course, exercise that we talked about is a big part about it. And then finally, I think about it from a supplement standpoint. So obviously we're in the supplement business, and a big part of why I'm here is because I recognize that given the go-go demanding world that we live in, for people to have enough time to focus on all these issues, it's sort of almost overwhelming. And I think what happens for a lot of people is they just kind of throw their hands up in the air and they say, heck, it's too much to think about it. I can't do it. I don't want that to be the case. One of my beliefs about supplements is, and the trueness of that title is, it's a supplement to your health practices, whatever those happen to be. And so if you're making a good decision about how you might supplement your diet so that you get closer to the levels that you want it to be, you might not have had a perfect day, but for example, you could have the green juice. So if you didn't get an adequate amount of fresh fruits and vegetables per day, which for me, even though I'm knowledgeable about these things, I don't. And so we made the super green juice for just this reason. It's a chance to get 44 different, we talked about food varieties last week and that having an impact in lowering heart disease risk and cancer risk. Well, this is organically sourced and a great way to supplement your diet. By no means does it take the place of trying to eat all the fresh fruits and vegetables you can, but in a modern world, I think this is a must. The second one for me is to rely as heavily as I can on the Pure Body Extra as well as the Pure Body Regular. You know, for those that don't know a lot about our zeolite products, I encourage you to spend some time educating yourself. I think of them as a tool to support my body's own natural abilities to detox, just like the green leafies that you find in the super green juice. That natural mineral, and I mean, frankly, I call it this sort of a miracle mineral because it naturally is attracted to these positively charged heavy metals and environmental pollutants and helps to escort them out of your body. So just think about this exposure that you have on a daily basis, even if you are using a water filter, even if you're using an air filter, that exposure is still there. And so to me, it's a series of tools, just like the green drink and other foods that I eat. It's a series of tools to aid my body, help my body to reduce that body burden. So with that, people ask me, what's your focus? There's a lot of things that I try to think about, but if I had to sort of sum it up for you, it would be consider the amount of ultra-processed foods that you have in your diet. Consider your lifestyle from a sleep, exercise, water consumption standpoint, and then think about in terms of what can you do to augment, to supplement your habits, to give yourself sort of that optimal opportunity to reduce your risk of degenerative diseases like cardiovascular disease and cancer, and then additionally to have the energy and the vitality you need to live the life that you want. That's what these products are for. That's what these habits do, is position you to live the life that you want. So with that, until next time, I'm Eddie Stone. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with me, and we'll talk to you next week.